That time I thought I could not go any closer to grief without dying, I went closer, and I did not die. This verse from Mary Oliver's poem, Heavy, seems to describe the pangs of grief and lament so acutely. How when you don't think you could travel any closer, to go any deeper with loss, there are still new depths to be traveled. And in the midst of feeling that this heaviness couldn't be any heavier, how your spirit couldn't take the weight of its burden any longer, somehow we can travel yet closer to our grief and not die. In our service this morning, we are holding a space for the bluer feelings that come for some of us around the holidays. While this is often a season of lots of celebrating and great cheer, of families, friends, and loved ones gathering around tables, around trees, in family rooms, and in hearths, there are heavier feelings that come as well. The emptiness of sorrow and loss, the hollow feelings of deepest sadness and longing. As we turn toward that vacant place at the table, the favorite chair that now sits empty, as we hold our memories of holidays and seasons past, we can sometimes be met with incredible amounts of sorrow and grief. Sometimes holidays aren't always glimmering lights and cozy gatherings. Sometimes they're blue. As a minister, one of the greatest privileges of this profession and calling is getting to travel with people through all of life's moments and stages. Yes, the joy as well as the sorrow. Learning to sit with people in the midst of loss and grief, I came across reflections from Nicholas Wolterstorff, words that I shared earlier to open the service. In his book, Lament for a Son, Wolterstorff captures the humanness of his pain with the loss of Eric, his 25-year-old son, after his son's tragic mountaineering accident in the Alps. In this powerful and painful reflection, Wolterstorff names the loneliness he feels in his grief, how he so often feels that he must carry this all on his own, how others just don't seem to understand how heavy and unbearable this loss is. He asks the powerful question, what do you say to someone who is suffering? What do you say to someone who is suffering? What can we possibly say to someone who has known the inexplicable loss of a child, of a loved one? How can there ever be hope in the midst of this heavy loss when the pain and longing couldn't possibly travel any deeper? As Wolterstorff says, to comfort me, you have to come close. It's a beckoning that reminds us of Mary Oliver's invitation to travel yet closer to these feelings, that their heavy burden is a burden that can be shared with others. When we witness those we love in times of great pain, it can all be too tempting to jump to saying things like, you'll get through this, and it isn't so bad. We can jump to offering suggestions or solutions to trying to explain away some of their pain in ways that make ourselves more comfortable, but don't actually meet someone right where they are. Though these aren't the responses that are needed. To revisit Wolterstorff again, your words don't have to be wise. The heart that speaks is heard more than the words spoken. Not even the best of words can take away the pain. What I need to hear from you is that you recognize how painful it is. I need to hear from you that you are with me in my desperation. come, sit beside me on my mourning bench. Dear ones, I know that this sermon is feeling rather heavy. It'll also be shorter than some of my more regular sermons. I know that many of us are used to coming to church on Sunday to hear the good news, to find the familiar, joyful, and vibrant energy that just propels us forward, a message and energy that can help us to carry on. The reality is that there is good news in the midst of this heaviness. There is good news in our ability to travel closer to these bluer feelings together, that those of us who are longing for comfort can find ourselves held here. The good news that here in this place we might find others willing to join us on our mourning bench for a little while. That though we might feel alone in our sorrow, there are others who travel this journey alongside us. Many of us have known loss across our lives. For myself, today marks the 4th anniversary of my own grandmother's passing, my Grandma Jan, who I was immensely close with. Her death was only days away before our annual Jensen family Christmas party, and it was clear that this big loss that year was palpable. The room simply just felt emptier and quieter. Her favorite reclining chair empty in the corner. I found that so many in our family didn't know how to quite make sense of this sudden and unexpected passing. How we delicately danced around the topic in our small talk, acknowledging her passing with quick frowns and sorrowful eyes. I know for my dad and his 2 brothers, this can be a harder season for them as they think back on their mother's life and how much they miss her. For myself, I wish there was a way I could still talk with her, to pull up a chair and hear about all of the family gossip that year, to crack jokes with my brother that make her just roll her eyes at us. And while it's been a few years now since her death, somehow the memory is still there. The longing to have just one more chat with my grandmother again. How many of us have felt losses like this one? And who is it that we still carry on our hearts even now? How have we traversed the loneliness of these feelings, of the grief of seasons past that are no longer? As I say each Sunday to preface our time for sharing our joys and concerns, none of us is meant to travel life's journey alone. Though as hard and heavy as it is, I think we need to turn more toward these bluer feelings in this season. When we are willing to turn toward these feelings, when we are truly willing and able to sit with someone else in the midst of their sorrow and pain, we give ourselves permission to acknowledge and open ourselves to joy. In this Soul Matters month of opening to joy, we cannot hope to open the joy of this season without first turning toward the harder parts that we hold. Indeed, some of us simply aren't ready for joy. Our loss still feels too fresh. The pains and wounds that we carry are too great to force on our smiles, to force our face into smiles, to pretend that all is merry and bright when it just simply isn't. By turning toward these bluer feelings, we can travel yet closer to these hard feelings and live. We can honor our connections to what has changed, how we ourselves have changed, knowing that our grief and longing help us to know the specialness of life. Turning toward these feelings can't fill the empty seat. They can't fill the empty hole of loss in our hearts. However, it can remind us that life is too precious for us to pass it by with empty living. We can remind one another that there is a place for our quiet sorrows, and that hope can be found even when this hope is hard to find. In our Time for All Ages this morning that Claire shared with us, we hear about the deepest wish of the trees to be picked as a Christmas tree, to be decorated and adorned in bright lights and ornaments, with families and loved ones gathering amidst their branches. One tree feels less hopeful, believing that the tree's days of ever possibly being picked as a special tree are long past. And yet what we find is that the tree is picked after all. The animals gather around to celebrate the gift that is this one tree, even a tree left for a while to be on its own. With acorns and berries, they decorate the tree, showing the tree that the tree wasn't so alone after all. Dear ones, as you traverse these harder feelings of this season, my hope is that you, like the tree, find that you are not alone in the midst of your sorrow. As we hold these harder feelings, I hope you feel held in the greater love of this community, a love greater than any single one of us, and greater than any single one of us could ever hope to hold simply on our own. And if there are those of you who are not yet ready to experience the joy, who need a little more time mourning, grieving, or sitting with these hard feelings, may you remember life's goodness behind your sorrow, the parts that remind you to take heart as you travel closer to your grief. May we all be willing to join one another on that mourning bench, knowing that not all hope is lost. Indeed, in the midst of these blue feelings, we can still find consolation and comfort. May you be held and loved beyond belief. May it be so, and amen.